Good morning, dear respected teacher, dear noble community. The festival continues. So today today is August 8th, 2016, and we're in the Stillwater Meditation Hall. It's the fourth day of our Wake Up Earth retreat. We're very honored to have here Christiana Figueres from the UN Framework on Climate Change and Cooperation. And she shared beautifully yesterday about how we can find an antidote to our despair, blame, and hopelessness. So today, I'd like to share about joy and fear. And I'd like to start by telling a story. So it's a personal story, and it's also collective. It's a story about my father. And my father in me. And my mother. My mother in me. And it's a very compelling story that we are only recently coming to terms with. And this story has been told in many ways. So there are many ways to tell many stories. So this story is about a lot of compost floating around in space. Stellar compost. You'd think it would be only just things like hydrogen and helium, those kind of very simple atoms, but there's all kinds of strange things in there, like iron, these heavy elements born from supernova explosion. Even things like uranium that are changing, breaking down. And they're all swirling around in space, coming together from the pull of their own gravity, generating heat. So this is a story about deep ecology. And like all good stories, we are part of this story. So all this compost was coming together and then breaking apart and coming together again. We don't know how many times. It practiced a deep recycling. But we know, as far as we can tell, that about 4.5 billion years ago, all this compost started to coalesce into this rocky planet that we're sitting on right now, that we can feel under our legs. So this story is experiential. You may have heard parts of this story before, but we're going to experience it a little bit differently. Because in our very body is all of this compost. In this 2-meter long body, we have the whole cosmos represented. So this rocky mass formed and cooled. It may have been that another large rocky mass slammed into it, joined together with it, and sent off pieces flying that orbited around, becoming what we call the moon. At that time, it seems there's nothing we could call life on this rocky planet, but there was heat. It had a core of heat and water. And over the course of 1 billion years, it means 1 billion times of this rocky mass going around another molten mass, sending off light and heat we call the sun. And we don't know exactly how, and maybe that's okay. We started to see very tiny microbes, a little circle of soup with a tiny membrane. It may be that in all the chemical reactions moving about between the water of the ocean and the thermal vents deep below the ocean surface, that this tiny circle of this soup of chemicals started to find ways to replicate itself. Or it may be in a puddle somewhere on the surface of the earth. With this light of the sun, it started to take form. And things continued this way for quite a while. Maybe another 2 billion revolutions around the sun. Parts of this cell became parts of other cells. And we have our great ancestor, our last universal ancestor, between our brothers and sisters, the bacteria, the archaea, And we, your descendants, the eukaryotes, these are all just names. But they're names to describe a story that is written in stone all around us. And it's written in our bones, in the sinews and flesh of our body. When we practice to be aware of it, when we read deeply into our body. And if we were around at that time, it would be very difficult to breathe. There was not very much oxygen. A lot of hydrogen, carbon dioxide. And then some of these, our brothers and sisters, the bacteria, started to transform their environment on a global scale with the sun and carbon dioxide and water. They produced one of the greatest you could say mass defecations of all time. And we have oxygen everywhere. Oxygen to breathe. And life forms began to breathe in a new way. And other life forms could no longer tolerate all of that. Oxygen. They started to come together. They started to become more specialized. But they could all breathe. Like every cell in our body, we still maintain this capacity to breathe in every cell of our body. Now we're getting closer to the present moment. About 541 million years ago, there was an explosion like this of life in the ocean. Many living beings swimming, impelled by their own motion. Some of them basking in the sunlight, some of them avoiding it, going deep down. Some of them nourishing themselves on each other. Mm. 541 million years ago, our planet, the Earth, had in its oceans as much biodiversity, as far as we can tell, as we have now. And we are so proud of our biodiversity nowadays. So there were things like sponges, corals, nautiloids, with a spiral body like that, a shell. Starfish, urchins, lots of worms. Worms swimming, worms in the bed of the ocean. Maybe we can breathe and enjoy the sound of the bell. when you go on walking meditation, you may see moss under the trees. I like to imagine that moss about 400 million years ago. The first plant on land. Something like that, a little bit more simple. At first only just kind of algae. And then learning how to bring the water up the stem of its body. Meanwhile, in the ocean, we start to see something like a fish. But it could not close its jaws. It just would swim around and things would go in. And it had gills to be able to breathe, because all this oxygen was dissolving in the water. With time, it had a spine. And it evolved some kind of limb that allowed it to go more easily through the water. And there's a book called My Inner Fish. I like that practice of being in touch with my inner fish. So the fish was moving along, and it learned that it could actually use the fins to move in shallow water along the earth, and even allow its head to come above the water. And as the oxygen passed over its gills, it could even bring the air into its mouth now. And allow that air to cover its gills, to circulate the oxygen, breathing throughout its body, generating heat. Later, about 240 million years ago, now we see on the earth ancestors of reptiles, our ancestors, amphibians, and dinosaurs. 230 million years ago, the ancestors of the dinosaurs. And if you see a magpie flying around, you can say, "Hello, my little dinosaur." And you think dinosaurs didn't have feathers. And our ancestors, the mammals, we learned how to give birth. To our descendants in a womb. 150 million years ago, the marsupials, those that carried their young after birth in a pouch in the belly, and the placentals went their separate ways as brothers and sisters. Now we're speeding up. We're getting closer. Two million years ago, kind of something like a chimpanzee or a bonobo, developed into it had already learned how to walk upright. And the conditions in Africa were such that you could not just walk a few hundred meters and find your favorite fig tree to gorge yourself on. It took a little bit more walking to find the food, to learn how to dig with stones under the earth. You just imagine a potato, but something much less sweet. So about 2 million years ago, our ancestors learned to hunt, to gather their food. They were walking upright and they could look forward and hold themselves with their spine in an upright way. Even run and cool themselves off while they ran with millions of sweat glands all over their body. This was new technology. All the other animals, the other tetrapods, the kind of deer, antelope, they couldn't handle this new technology. They could run much faster, but in the heat of the day, they would quickly become tired and have to stop and pant. They could not run fast when they were panting. So our ancestors, they were slower, but they knew how to cool down with their sweat. As long as they had water before and after. And we began to eat meat. Remember, this is a story about my father and my mother. We give a name, Homo sapiens, to our ancestors that we find in the rock record 200,000 years ago. They were larger, slower growing, and so began, although it was only a continuation, a new kind of evolution we call cultural evolution. Language, ways of doing things, cooperating together, using tools. And before then we had many other very similar brothers and sisters around us, looking almost like us. But soon we became the only species like us. The man that knows, Homo sapiens, the person, the human being that is knowing. Again, for many years it went on like this. And then about 12,500 years ago, we had watched how seeds scattered on the earth could sprout. And we had an insight. What if I planted that seed in the earth before it rained? And we learned how to master this very, very new technology. And we learned that if we planted the seed that nourished us more, we would get more and more nourishing seeds that followed, and fruit, and roots. And again, things went on like this for a long time. We started getting really bad cavities. Before then, our teeth were immaculate. We spent most of our time chewing plants. And then, suddenly, we had this very high energy, concentrated food with concentrations of sugar beyond what we had known before. And we started to get really bad cavities and probably bad breath as well. And our mouth became smaller. We didn't need to chew as much anymore. So, when I was a teenager, my parents went through a separation and a divorce. And it was very painful for me and my sister, and for them. So in all of this coming together, all of this stream of continuation, where does this separation take place? Where does this pain of isolation, loneliness, misunderstanding, where does it come about? When I look deeply into my parents' divorce, I try to answer that question in my own body. With my father in me, my mother in me. One more important event of note, around 1760 to 1820 of the Common Era, it means about 200 years ago or more, we started to learn to make machines to do our work for us. So all of these works of genius, like planting a seed, started to be done by machines. So I'd like to share a little bit about true love. In this story, this very compelling story, which is a story that makes up a lot of our way of being and walking on the earth for the last 25 years, 30 years. The story that, like other stories that have been written by hand and told over campfires, is a story. And it may have some elements of truth, and it may have some elements of wrong perception. We try to see how in these stories we transmit and grow our capacity to overcome this division and separation. There's a text in the Buddhist tradition called the Diamond Sutra. And it talks about kind of deep ecology. And we are still not fully come to terms with its proposal. It talks about 4 kinds of discrimination that we make. The first one is a self, with a big F. We think we are this separate self. What we think is me. This hand is me. These feelings, my anger, my joy, we think this is me. So we separate ourselves from our brothers and sisters, from our parents, from the other animals and plants. We think this is only me. It's nothing to do with you. That is the first kind of discrimination we are subject to. We think, because my skin is this color, these are my people. And your skin is that color, so you are those people. You are different. We discriminate based on person, the idea of a person. Human beings. We think only we have suffering, only we have joy and happiness, only we have intelligence as Homo sapiens. We have fallen prey to that delusion in our life. And the third one is a living being. We think because we can breathe, because we can replicate ourselves, we can reproduce ourselves, that we are somehow separate from everything else in the universe. That this rock mass that we stand on the earth, that the sun, even with its vibrant heat, its regeneration of elements, is not alive. It's a dead, inert piece of mass. Somehow we've convinced ourselves that that is the case, that we are somehow separate. And the last thing is a lifespan. As a result of thinking like this, we get caught in our idea of birth and death. That when we're born, that's the beginning. And when we die, it's the end. And that's it. It's because we think we're separate from Mother Earth. And we think we are separate from our sister, our brother, our mother, our father. So that's why when we look deeply into our body and we see, this is my father, his anger, his joy, his sadness has been transmitted to me, just like the water flowing down a river. My mother, her fear, her jealousy, as well as her hope and her care have been transmitted to me like a river flowing downstream. That I am born from my mother's womb is only a continuation of a stream that we now can see, now that we've looked into this story we can directly experience in our body. There was a man here a few years ago, and in that winter retreat, our teacher Tai suggested that we practice every morning to listen to a short text on how to practice to stop our thinking during walking. And this man became very upset. "We cannot stop our thinking," he said. "It's impossible." The Buddha had this interesting phrase: whatever is comes to be based on causes and conditions. And it passes away due to causes and conditions. When the nutriment is no longer there, then it ceases to manifest. So when we nourish our thinking with our emotion, then it's very difficult to see how we can stop our thinking. To really see clearly what is happening. Thinking is not bad. But don't fall into that trap of thinking that you can't stop thinking. It's a vicious cycle. When we know there is a time when thinking was not there, then we know, just like everything we see in the world, it is impermanent. And it is possible to see without thinking. And it is that thinking which brings about these ideas of a self, of a person, a living being, and a lifespan. And the limitless joy is right there inside of us, just waiting for us to allow it to become free. My brother shared about the cage of our thinking. And our door is open. We help you to see the bars of the cage. That is what we do as fellow practitioners. We help each other. All of us have our suffering. Just like my father and my mother. They're suffering the yelling, the blaming, the feelings of despair and hopelessness. If we're not careful, those emotions become like a cage. They take over our mind. They invade, and they take no prisoners. And I share, in my practice, I really benefited from what we call the practice of non-fear. Because to let go of these ideas can bring up a lot of fear. These are ideas that help us to orient ourselves in the world as we see it. And everybody believes in that, right? So, don't I need to as well? So we learned many antidotes yesterday. And the antidote for fear, the fear that obstructs all this joy from manifesting in every moment, We call it signlessness. Usually we have ideas and concepts about the world. We see a tree and we think, tree. We have the perception of a tree. And we make that perception stronger. We think a tree must be like that in order for it to be a tree. And when we look at the tree, we no longer see the tree anymore. We see a name, an image in our head. We think, there's nothing interesting about that tree anymore. I already know it. This is where there be dragons. We have to be careful. We talk about danger in our mind. This danger of thinking we know is the source of a lot of our suffering. And when we practice and we grow our capacity to be free from fear, we can practice to see things as they really are, in every moment. Not to be obscured by this veil of stories, this veil of ideas, perceptions like, I am a separate self, this body is me, it is not you. These kind of ideas. And when we have that kind of non-fear, there's a lot of joy. When I think about our ancestral eukaryotes, the amoeba, when I reflect on them, I don't see very much thinking, but I think there was a lot of joy. I think it was very joyful to swim in the ocean, to live fully our life as an amoeba. Don't underestimate the joy of an amoeba. It's true. There are other amoebas that ate that amoeba. And it's true that we may not be here if it weren't for that. But that doesn't mean that amoeba did not enjoy the present moment. And yet here we are, sitting here amongst brothers and sisters who are caring for each other, who are taking care of one another. Why do we have this background of fear? Why are we not able to enjoy this present moment? When we talk about love in Plum Village, true love, it is something limitless. It starts with being kind to ourselves and to others. Kindness or loving kindness. We take care of our body. We take care of our thinking. We take care not only of our own thinking, our own body, for our brother and sister, for the toad that crossed my path on the way here to the hall, and the cat who's sleeping lazily in the sun, not even bothering to look at the toad, for the bacteria in the air. We extend our kindness within ourselves and in every direction, to the biome in our gut, to the bacteria on the surface of our skin. We have no limit to our kindness. We know that we need very little to be able to live. What we need, we take, but the rest we leave. So the first element of true love is kindness, loving kindness. The second, we call compassion. We understand the suffering of ourselves, and we know how to transform it. We see how things arise due to nutriment, like we learned yesterday. And we know if we remove that nutriment, if our thinking of violence, of anger, of fear, if we remove that kind of thinking, and we bring our attention back to the breath, without interruption, like we learned, we're mindful and we cultivate concentration. We're aware of the breath the whole way through, and the in-breath and the whole way through on the out-breath. Based on that mindfulness and concentration, we get an insight. We actually see directly what's going on right now. What's going on is my breathing. What's going on is this body, these feelings, these perceptions, these emotions, and this awareness. It's going on right now, and right now, and right now. We just become aware of that. That is a liberation. That's a deep insight. You are alive. It's a miracle. We are alive together here. We're sitting together in peace, in calm, in quiet, with love, kindness. That is the kind of thing that brings about transformation. That kind of insight. And that is the understanding which brings about transformation of suffering. So compassion, we learn how to take care of our difficult emotion, to be solid like a tree, like an oak tree in a storm, going down to its roots, aware of its trunk. Even the storm passes through the leaves. It cannot knock me over. I know that life is more than just this storm. That is compassion. The third element of true love is joy. When I was 24 years old, I had a lot of anger. I still have anger. I know that anger is deep in the rock record of this planet Earth. And it has been transmitted through many, many generations. I felt angry at my parents for their anger at each other. I wanted to find the joy and the happiness of my childhood when we were all together. The four of us, my parents, my sister. In my mind, there was this fountain of joy in the past, and it seemed like it had dried up. I didn't even want to be happy. Why do I need happiness? And then suffering came. A lot of suffering. I thought, I am this person. I've got my university degree. I trained to do this. I think I am this separate self, this kind of godlike being living on the planet Earth. Kind of super intelligence. Everyone else is living these crazy lives, running around, polluting the environment. This kind of thinking was coming up. And that created a lot of suffering. But a door opened. In fact, that door was already open. I became aware of my body. I learned to become aware of my body. To not put all this value in my thinking. So much pride in what I think, my ideas, my innovation, my creativity. I put all that down and just became aware of my breath and my body and learned that I can generate a feeling of joy whenever I want. That first moment when, not because I was thinking about anything, that joy arises like a fountain, filling my whole body, every cell in my body with so much happiness and contentment. This door, this Dhamma door opened. And that is what I wish for you. I know you have already touched it. That is what we wish for each other as brothers and sisters. That is the fourth aspect of true love. Inclusiveness. We include everyone, everything. And this helps us with our practice of inclusiveness. When we let go of the idea there is a separate me, I. When we see this flow, these rivers of our body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness, we see it without beginning, without end. There is no limit to what we can include. There are no more boundaries. It is open. It has always been open. We can let everything in. Like we heard yesterday, bring on the mud. This is the mud of life. Our suffering, the interstellar compost that has come together in this body. We let it all be there as it is, and we shine the light of awareness on it. That is true love, true embracing, true acceptance, without limit. And we all have it. We all have that capacity. We have the door open in our mind, so we just need support because we forget. We think, we convince ourselves it's otherwise. And we support each other sometimes in convincing each other that it's otherwise. We don't trust. We go back into the cage because it was safe there, because there were things that we could give names to, concepts. It looks really cozy in there. And we just want to stay in there. It's like going back into the womb where it's warm and everything we need is provided. But we don't see that we already are in the womb of Mother Earth. And that we are made up of the womb of Mother Earth. We have everything we need within ourselves. The joy, the happiness, the freedom. All of that nourishment is there. We just need to get in touch with it and stop forgetting. This talk is offered to my dear brother, Phap. I know you are there, and I'm so happy.